share a little bit more about your experience fostering? Was it during
Mhm.
residency? What was that like? How did you figure out how to do that?
Yeah, so we explored infant adoption and then international adoption and foster care adoption. And we actually, I think it was serendipitous in some ways, right? Because we were friends with people who had fostered and who had welcomed multiple different children for short periods. And then they were on the pathway to adoption for one of their kiddos. And so we just really got to have an up close and personal view of foster care. We explored international adoption probably pretty heavily because that was just something that we were curious about, I think. But then we realized there were a lot of ethical dilemmas and just things that didn't feel quite right to us with some of the international laws and just things about the children and still their parents being alive, but just basically being unable to financially support them. And so that's what led us really to feel that we knew that there was a huge need for foster parents and that they were like in our city in Seattle where we were living. And so it was a wild experience, to be honest. We went through, I think it was about 9 months. I remember it being about the length of a pregnancy of going through foster care training. And I learned so much, obviously, just more about the needs and the system, the inefficiencies within the system, of course. Again, it's very complicated in terms of their desire is always to reunite the children with biologic family and biologic parents if that's possible. And if it's not, then even their second, third, fourth options are to have any connection. So it could be like an aunt in a different state or anything like that. Is that's their priority is to keep kids with some kind of biologic family connection. When we had our son come, he was like a month old and he did not have any kind of visitation with parents because his birth father was actually deceased, and then his birth mother struggled with mental health addiction, things that made it really challenging for her to be able to show up in the ways that I think she would have wanted to. So, yeah, there's a lot of complicated feelings that I have about what's right, what's wrong, and all of this. But at the end of the day, we just obviously wanted what was best for the little boy, and we were able to kind of expedite through things because there were no visitations. We had social work visits. It was like weekly for a while. It's a blur, honestly, because I was in the fourth year of residency, applying for fellowships and doing all sorts of things. But he was just such a little joy and such a breath of fresh air for us after having so much stress and so much uncertainty. It felt so joyful, yeah, for us to be able to parent him. And he was one of the happiest babies I've ever met. And he still just had the most lovely personality. So we just feel so, so blessed to have gone through that experience and be able to have him as part of our forever family. We were able to adopt him when he was just over 1 year old. And it's a crazy experience to navigate while you're going through it. And then, of course, after, I feel like it's like a marriage, is what I tell people. You get married, and that's really exciting at the adoption day. And then you're like, oh, and then there's life, there's parenting, and then you add the complicated layers of how to talk to them at different ages and stages about their story, about the navigation of this identity that you have, and sort of what that all means. And gosh, it's just been such a journey to go through and figure out relationships with his biologic family and extended family and just it feels like you're doing it in the dark. But the only way I can say that there's help is people that have done it and walked through it and just giving their experience is how I've best learned and part of communities of parents who are navigating similar waters and leaning on each other and knowing that nobody has a rule book for any of this. So we're just all doing the best we can and trying to use what evidence supports and what therapists recommend. It is an ongoing growth journey where I feel like I am constantly learning.
Absolutely. And to do this still as a resident, all this time,
Mm-hmm.
all this effort, and you had mentioned, I don't know if you were in an environment where you could even share this huge part of your life so much.
Right. You know what's interesting is I think that there's also a lot of misconceptions and even biases around foster care, the biologic parents, what this all means. Because I can remember being very excited and sharing with different people in my program. And most people were supportive, but I feel like they didn't really know how to support me or how to really have conversations about some of it because it was so out of the box. They were so unfamiliar. But I do remember my program director talking to her and her saying, people like us don't really do foster. And I remember that being like, really, what? But I think what she was referring to was like, there's this misconception that fostering is something that people do to make money or get a check from the government and taking multiple children so that they're like supporting an income and doing it for the wrong reasons. And I just think that is so harmful in a lot of ways because, gosh, we have just so many children who need safe homes that have the resources to help support them in all of their different needs. And so, yeah, I felt like that was like a really insensitive, difficult thing for me to receive back then. But I think it was just coming from like a place of almost ignorance, like not knowing better. And yeah, I'm hoping that with more conversation, people are understanding like the depth of the need of good foster parents who are willing to put in the work and to show up for these kids because it's absolutely needed and yeah, they deserve all of the goodness.
I feel so much warmth just in my body as you're talking because obviously, when people go into medicine, there's such a huge aspect of fulfillment. And that you were
Mm-hmm.
able to have this huge source of fulfillment, this other such important goal for you.
Mm-hmm.
How did fostering, I guess, as you reflect back on that time, finishing residency and going through all of this and knowing the
Mm-hmm.
environments, what did it bring you in terms of fulfillment, sense of purpose?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that it really helped shift my perspectives and priorities, right? And I think it definitely opened up a world to me of recognizing that what I valued and what I wanted to spend my time on was not going to be conducive to 60 or 80-hour work weeks for the rest of my life. And so it really helped me get clear on what matters the most. And then how does that reflect in my everyday, like my sense of when I show up and how I want to show up and wanting to have energy left at the end of days for my children. Asher was about to be adopted when I found out I was pregnant. And that was like in the back of my mind. I'm not going to lie. I was like, there was, where you just don't think something's going to happen. And so it wasn't even like I was tracking cycles or doing anything like intentional, where for a while I was like obsessed with it. It was just like there was so much else going on. I wasn't thinking about it. And it just didn't even seem like a possibility. So when I found out I was pregnant and I had a 1 year old, I was like, whoa, things are going to get crazy. But I was getting ready to start the palliative fellowship. And so I think I just really got clear on how important it was going to be for me to radically take care of myself and protect my time and energy, not in a way to be like selfish, but in a way to be able to show up how I wanted to as a mom and as a wife and this recognition that like no one else is going to do that for me. You know what I mean? Like my program and hospital systems, they're going to say, great, I'm glad you have kids. That's awesome. But like they're not going to be the ones that are going to protect that for me and design a career where that is valued. So I really think that just gave me perspective on if I want to have a certain type of life and be able to have certain amounts of time devoted to family and kids on a regular basis, like that's something I have to create. It's not necessarily just going to appear or be the default.